This late autumn in Norway, we have been riding the new Santa Cruz Vala. It's basically the replacement for the original, the original EMTB version of the Heckler. 150mm travel rear, 160 travel front. It's a mullet bike, and I believe this bike only comes as a mullet. The Gen 2 Heckler could be converted between 29er and mullet, but not the Vala. And that's not the only difference between the Vala and the old Heckler. Santa Cruz always used to have virtual pivot point rear suspension kinematics, rear suspension design. This bike clearly has not. On the Heckler, the shock was more horizontal, low in the frame, going through the seat tube. And I remember back in 2019, we were discussing a bit, speculating, will there be a Santa Cruz EMTB? And I wasn't completely sure because of the VPP suspension. The lower link of the floating rear triangle, it was wrapped around the crank axle. So obviously there weren't room for this design because that space had to be used for the motor. But the Heckler EMTB version appeared, and it did have the VPP rear suspension, but it was sort of the low link VPP, I think. They changed it a bit. They moved the lower link further upwards on the frame. So a different design, but Santa Cruz appeared to be happy because they wanted the Heckler to look like the Bronson, which was recently updated. And they wanted the non-assist and assist versions to sort of look the same. So the bike we are testing, a size large, Santa Cruz Vala X0 RSV. X0 means it's got the SRAM transmission axis, X0 drivetrain, 12-speed wireless shifting, SRAM Maven silver stealth brakes, Fox Performance 38 factory, and the Fox Float X shock. It's not the burliest shock out there, but still nice Fox factory shock. And it's got the reserve wheels. Those are some pretty nice carbon wheels by Santa Cruz, their own brand. One thing that I think is cool, and I think a lot of people will appreciate, is the cable routing. Look, no internal cable routing through the headset. And the handlebars, they can be turned more than 90 degrees. There is no knock block headset blocking the steering. I mentioned the rear suspension design first. Others might think the motor is more interesting. It's got the Bosch Performance CX, the new one, Gen 5. And it's got a 600 watt-hours battery only. You can't get the 800 battery on this bike. And the battery sits fixed inside the down tube. It's not easily detachable. And it seems to me more brands are going fixed batteries these days. So fewer detachable batteries. And for the most part, for most people, I think that's a good idea. It's a less complicated design, less things to go wrong. You don't have to worry about battery alignment. You don't have to worry about battery attachments, contacts coming loose. And it saves weight and it saves cost. So unless you really need to be able to remove the battery. Like here in Norway during winter, we can't keep the bike outside if you want to charge the battery. So if you can get away with an internally fixed battery, that's the way to go. I'm not going to say much more about the Bosch CX motor here. I've got a review that you can watch if you want to know more about it. But it's a very nice motor. It's quite silent, both descending and while coasting and while pedaling, and very easy to control even under quite a bit of power, even in the highest assistance modes. It's not just the shock and the rear frame that differs from the Heckler. The frame geometry is quite altered too. Now we're down to 63.9 degrees for the head tube angle, and that's in the low position. There is a flip chip at the bottom of the shock that can be flipped, and you can move the bottom part of the shock forwards or backwards, and that only slightly alters the geometry. It takes the head angle up or down by 0.3 degrees, so it's 64.2 in the high setting. Seat angle, it's 0.3 of difference there to like 77.2 to 77.5. The wheelbase will slightly alter, but just by 1 millimeter. So what's the point of having this flip chip when the changes are so minimal? Well, to me, I think it's the bottom bracket height, 4 millimeters. And it might not sound that much, but that at least is noticeable. In the high setting, 344 millimeters. In the low setting, 340. And we basically rode this bike in the low setting because I really enjoy riding a low bottom bracket. I know everyone doesn't, but I never had a pedal strike on this bike, and I very much enjoy the slightly lower position when descending and cornering. You're sitting more inside the bike, behind the handlebars, the lower the bottom bracket gets. So, riding the bike. On our first trip, I had this experience that I think says a lot about this bike. It sums up a lot of the important key factors. I'm going down this quite easy trail, mostly gravel and quite narrow and very steep, straight. And at some point, I'm considering, wow, this is going quite fast. Should I consider braking? Okay, let's just try. And I immediately regretted my decision because these Ezra Maven Silver stealth brakes, they really scrub hard. And sure, that's fine. But I was losing so much speed and I decided there was no need to brake because the bike was tracking the surface so well. So I just wanted to get up to speed again. The Schwalbe radial tires, Magic Mary front and rear. The rear tire, it's the soft compound in the gravity casing, a bit burlier tire, thicker sidewalls, which also means a bit of damping in the tires. So the tires won't be as bouncy. It aids the suspension, really. It helps the rear suspension track the ground better. And combined with the new rear suspension design, Santa Cruz makes a point of it being quite different to the Heckler design. The anti-rise and anti-squat has been greatly altered. Santa Cruz claims this suspension will be more active while pedaling. And what I noticed when descending, when hitting the brakes, on my old Santa Cruz Bronson, with a completely different anti-rise curve, the back end would extend while braking. And the weight would shift forwards and I would compress the fork and the bike would basically tip forwards. It would dive a bit when braking. That did not happen at all on this bike. What happened was you were sitting quite low on the bike and you were grabbing the brakes and the bike would sort of inch down slightly, just sitting closer to the ground. It was tracking so well. The tires were gripping and the bike was just planted and the rear end wasn't like bouncing, sliding out. It made me realize this bike can handle a lot more than I was putting it through. So riding on the trails, these were wet trails, lots of rocks and roots, everything slippery. That's the way it is in Norway riding in autumn. And I sort of leveled up riding this bike. I noticed with these very compliant grippy tires and the very active rear suspension, I could go faster than I was sort of expecting. And I was going faster than on many other bikes we have been riding lately. So, a great, very capable descender. The quite aggressive slack geometry makes it very stable. So, riding flatter trails, you would assume a burly, stable descender that's planted to the trail surface. It won't be much fun. The old Heckler was quite a lightweight bike and to me a very fun all-round trail bike, more than a capable descender. But this bike is light too. In size large, we weighed it in at 22 kilos with these race face Atlas pedals. So Yeah, we're at about 21.5 kilos, which is claimed by Santa Cruz. The heavy tires, you would think they would sort of be holding the bike back a bit, slowing down the steering. But I suspect relatively heavy tires in combination with the reserve wheels, with the light carbon rim. The carbon rim makes up for the added rotating mass. It still feels nimble and quick, even though you got quite heavy tires. That was quite a surprise, and I really enjoyed that with this bike. Unfortunately, this is quite an expensive bike at like $11,500 US. So you could go for a cheaper model, but then you won't get the Santa Cruz reserve wheels. So who knows, I fear we might lose some of the characteristics of this bike that I quite like. Anyway, riding flatter trails, just like its predecessor, it's a nice, fun, nimble bike. It's lightweight after all. And the only time I could feel this sort of being a more burly bike was when doing sharp turns at low speed, for instance. When talking about the geometry, I skipped the chainstays. And now I'm going to talk about climbing with this bike. And that's a good time to talk about chainstays. 444 millimeters in the low setting, 446 in the high setting. That doesn't sound like a lot. It's size-specific chainstays, so they will alter slightly, be a tad shorter on size medium and small, a tad longer on the extra large and the extra large. And I think 444, it's pretty much perfect on this bike. Sure, it won't make it a climbing specialist, but riding our trails these days, it's not the geometry of the bike that was holding it back. The very grippy rear tire combined with a powerful motor, it made it go up everything we rode, every steep hill. Sure, I guess the climbing performance could have been improved with longer chainstays, but I'm pretty sure I would not risk that, sacrificing everything else that I like about this bike. I think this is spot on. If you want to sit on the back of the saddle while climbing, yeah, you can't do that, but you could move forward and most people would be okay. So, to sum it up, Santa Cruz abandoned their signature rear frame design, and I think that's a great idea. Santa Cruz themselves said they did so to have more insertion in the C-tube and to make room for the motor. But this motor is no bigger than previous motors. They always had that issue. So to me, it seems perhaps the compromise was a bit too big, sticking with the VPP rear suspension, and Santa Cruz decided to sort of drop the similarities between an assist bike and a non-assist bike. And I think that was the correct choice, a great choice. To me, it still looks like a Santa Cruz. The shapes, the joints, the shape of the tubes, it's unmistakably Santa Cruz. Color scheme with just one single color and these big letters, it looks like a Santa Cruz, even though something is off around the bottom bracket area. The only thing that sort of makes me sad is the price of the bike, $11,500 US, and I can't ever see myself spending that kind of money owning this kind of bike. Sure, there are cheaper versions like the entry Vala R build, and it's $7,300 US. But you're not getting these rims, and I'm not really sure you're getting the same riding experience. Who knows, perhaps it's a great choice, that bike. Pon, the owner of Santa Cruz, they also own other brands. So they have been targeting Santa Cruz more towards the high-end market. They don't want cheaper entry-level models. If you want a cheaper bike, you could have a look at Focus. It only comes with an alloy frame and it's much cheaper, and it's a Pon bike too. But after having ridden the bike, I don't want a heavier, cheaper bike. I want this one. That's it. Appreciate any likes and subscribes. Thanks for watching.